Hi everyone, welcome to this week's lecture. And today, as indicated in your syllabus, right, you're supposed to read Arguing a Position, which is chapter 6, right? And specifically the essays of Jessica Statsky and Laura Beth Nielsen, right, in that same chapter. Um, but before I continue with that, a couple of reminders. Um, At the end of the video, I will talk to you about the prompt, which I've included in the email, and I will also put the prompt in course materials and iLearn, right? So you have easy access to that. Um, so I'll talk about that at the end of the video, and obviously I won't be able to talk about everything in the chapter, right? I will try to talk about points that are important, I think, especially important in terms of putting your essays together, right? So I'll focus on certain things, but I urge you to still read the entire chapter, right? Especially if, for those of you who did not um, take 1A, right, if you tested straight into 1B. Um, and if this is the first time that you're encountering the St. Martin's Guide, the book, right, um, I really, really encourage you to read the entire chapter, right, because that will only help you um, sort of familiarize you, right, to the structures of the essays, especially the examples. The sample essays are very important in terms of understanding what I talk about when I talk about thesis, when I talk about structures, counter arguments, concessions, etc. Right. So yeah. So try to read um, as much, if not all, of chapter 6 and you know all the readings. Right. So and lastly, I am using the ebook version of the St. Martin's Guide. So unfortunately, which it kind of bugs me too, but there are no page numbers, right? And so when I'm talking about it, I won't be able to tell you what page it is, but I will try to kind of be specific in kind of telling you which part of the chapter I'm talking about, right? So I'm going to kind of guide you through it, and I'm also kind of talking about from kind of progressively throughout the chapter, right? So it'll definitely be easier to it'll be easy to follow me, especially if you've read the chapter prior to listening to the lecture. Right. So in the opening passages of chapter 6, right, we see kind of examples, right, of what um, what what arguing a position is, right? So let's read it here. This is the first four sentences in chapter 6. Should parents think twice before signing up their kids for Little League? Might it not be a good idea for teens to get after school jobs? Should hate speech be protected? Should you care about online privacy if you haven't done anything wrong? Right. So obviously, if you read the entire chapter, you'll realize that these questions, right, are topics and issues that are being addressed in the sample essays, right? So these are examples of um, positions, right? Argumentative kind of positions, um, and notice how specific they are, right? The first one, for example, right? Should parents think twice before signing up their kids for Little League? right? So signing up kids for this specific activity, right? The Little League. Um, so yeah, so one way of thinking about this assignment and about arguing a position, right, um, is first to identify an issue, right, a problem, something that is debatable, right, something that has two opposing uh, arguments, right, that are equally sort of sound and reasonable, right? An issue that has no one answer, right? There will always be going to be kind of arguments, continuing arguments, right? Whether one is stronger than the other, there will be sort of continuing arguments because the issue can never be solved, right? Because it's an ideological issue, it's a philosophical issue, right, and things like that. So the issue cannot be something that has only one answer, right? Um, a kind of stupid example, not really stupid, but a simple example, right, is the fact that the sun, right, rises in the east and sets in the west, right? So that's an issue that I'm sure it was debated before, right, centuries or millennia ago, right? Um, but now it's not sort of a debated thing anymore, right? It does. The sun, that's where the sun rises, and that's where the sun sets. Um, and so you don't want that. You don't want an issue that already has one single answer, right? You want an issue that are still currently being debated, right? And once you've identified that issue, right, you will then choose a side, right? You will choose a side that you think um, that you agree with, and you think you will be able to provide a good argument for, right? And then you will sort of argue, right, for that side using facts, statistics, sort of reasonable argumentations, right? And I say, facts and statistics and reasonable argumentation, right, because that will be kind of the driving force, right, of your argument. This will not be the kind of paper, right, that will have, it's okay if you use, the I point of view, the first person perspective, right, but you will want to be careful in sort of using your opinion, because oftentimes, right, we've been told that opinions sort of they kind of contaminate facts, right, and statistics and things like that. So you want to use sort of evidence, right, along with, right, your own sort of argumentation, your own sort of um, position, right? You want to provide arguments or you want to provide evidence, right, in order to make your argument strong, right? So that's, yeah, so that's really what this chapter is about, right? How to do that, how to identify an issue, and then how to choose a position, and then how to argue for that position, right? That's what the chapter is about, and that's what your essay, right, the first essay is going to be about. Right, and because for this paper you will be using evidence, facts, statistics, and things like that, right? You'll be expected to do research, right? I will talk about this later on when I talk about the prompt, but you are required for this paper at least 3 outside sources, 1 scholarly journal, and 2 non-scholarly but credible sources, right? And I'll talk more about that later. Um, and so first, right, you're going to identify, an issue, and I want to encourage you um, to choose a topic that is of interest to you, right? That you are sort of that you already know a little about, right? Because then that will just make your work easier, right? And then it will only sort of, I think it will make your paper better if you sort of are interested in the issue that you're arguing about, right? So um, yeah, so that's one thing, right? And also, in order to you know properly argue your position, you have to know sort of all the complexities, right, of the issue, all the different sides. It's not because you argue for one side, you only have to know your side, right? You have to know both sides. You have to know several sides, right, in order for you to be able to properly argue your position, right? So that means you'll have to read about your issue, right? Do research, read articles, um, and look at encyclopedias, whatever you need to do, right? To kind of, and you won't necessarily use everything that you've read into your paper, right? But you will at least know how to talk about, right, or how to write about your issue, right? So it's important to A, be interested in what you're arguing for, and B, inform yourself, right, through research. And it's easier to write once you've done the sort of the readings, right? Once you've done your own research, once you've read about your topic, and then things just kind of naturally, most most of the time, just kind of like naturally come out, right? So those are the two things, right? All right. So reading more from the first kind of section. In this chapter, we ask you to compose a position argument on a controversial issue. Right. Your argument should try to convince readers to adopt your point of view, or at least to consider it seriously. Right. So you're supposed to use an issue that is controversial, and by controversial, that means that, like I said, right, there are two sides to the argument, right? So it's a contested issue. Um, and yeah, and then you choose a side, and then you will then convince your reader that your side is right, right, or a better argument, right, than the other side. All right. So then let's look at going down the chapter. It's too bad I can't give you page numbers, but this is on the part, um, the section called Determine the Writer's Purpose and Audience. Right. So I just want to read through, right, the purpose here, what your purpose is, right, for writing this paper. Um, A, you want to change readers' minds by challenging their values and beliefs. B, convince readers to look anew at the reasons and evidence, confirm the writer's refutation or possible objections, strengthen readers' opinions by providing them with convincing arguments, move readers to take action by stressing the urgency or seriousness of the issue. Right. So these should be kind of like your goals, right? Um, you don't necessarily have to like address them directly, right? But kind of consider them, and once you've written the paper, go back to this and say, oh, am I doing this? Um, am I challenging, right, other ways of thinking? Am I inspiring my readers to take action, right? Are my arguments convincing, right? So yeah, so go back to this, right? The writers also, right, you want readers to react by thinking critically about the values and beliefs underlying the position, re-examine the reasons and evidence, seriously consider the writer's refutation, reconsidering an issue they had been certain about, inspiring readers to do something about the issue, right? So these are, right, what's at stake in terms of why it's important for you to argue your position, right? Okay, so from here on, we will talk about the basic features, right? So the basic features are a focused and well-presented issue, right? A well-supported position, an effective response to opposing views, and a clear, logical organization, right? So I will have I'll talk about them, right, individually, and also talk about examples of what they look like, right? And as I will also talk about uh, in discussing the prompt, right? These are the basic features that I will be looking for when I'm grading your paper, right? So um, yeah, so you have to kind of pay attention to this part. All right, so let's talk about a focused and well-presented issue, right? So again, right, find an issue that interests you, find an issue that you want to talk about, right, that you feel passionately about, right? Um, so that's right, the first thing. Um, and also, right, for your assignment this week, um, you are supposed to send me 3 to 4 sentences, right? Email me 3 to 4 sentences um, describing your issue, right? So um, yeah, like your proposal for your issue, right? So if you're not sure if your issue is controversial enough, it's good enough, or whatever, I will let you know, right, once you've submitted that to me by the end of this week, Sunday. So so yeah, so don't worry too much if you're not sure yet what your issue is. Um, um, yeah, I will kind of I'll give you my thoughts once you've given me your ideas. All right. Yeah. So key to identifying an issue, right, is also identifying keywords about the issue, right? So for example, um, here the the title of one of the sample essays is Why Privacy Matters Even If You Have Nothing to Hide, right? So keywords is just, they have to be, or I guess, I don't know how else to be more specific with keywords, right? But they're sort of, like words that should kind of embody, right, your idea, your issue, right? And so they should be kind of like the point, or again, right, they should be the key word, um, that kind of that relates, right, to your issue. And so the keyword here, right, for this title is privacy, right? So why privacy matters, right, even if you have nothing to hide. So you'll know right away that the subject is going to be about privacy. Now, we don't know yet how they're going to argue uh, their position about privacy, what aspect of privacy they're going to talk about, right? But we at least know that the issue will be about privacy. So that's a main thing too, right? Is to identify an issue and then identify keywords, right? about your issue, right? And then what else do we have here? Right, so identifying a focused and well-presented issue, right? So oftentimes the structure of your argument should be, and that's kind of, that's included here, right? Um, it's a structure of when X happens, right? Most people think this, right? But I think this because this, right? Um, and I will give you a copy of my notes so that you'll have something to follow with if you want, right? So all of those things I've included in my notes, right? So the idea, right, of a focused issue is to identify what people are talking about, and to identify, right, again, what other people think, and then this is what I think, and this is why I think this, right? So that should be kind of like the overall structure of your argument, right? Um, the second one is a well-supported position, right? So now that you've identified your issue, right, you will then sort of choose a side, right? You've identified your issue. You've identified two positions, right? Arguing about the issue, right? And then now you have to choose a side, right? And your position, right, should be clear in your thesis, right? If you should be familiar enough, right, with the 5-paragraph essay structure, which is the first paragraph is the introduction, and usually the thesis is the last sentence or the last two sentences, right, of the first paragraph of the introduction paragraph, right? And then you'll have 3 body paragraphs, right, where you'll sort of explain your argument and give evidence and so on and so forth, right? And then you'll have your conclusion, right, as the 5th paragraph. So that's usually, right, the structure of of like the kind of formulaic 5-paragraph structure, right? And I urge you to just follow that, right? There's no need to kind of be too creative, right? If you want to do 6 paragraphs, that's fine with me, right? I would prefer um, I prefer like long or shorter paragraphs than paragraphs that are too long, right? And so that's fine. But I think at least 5 paragraphs would be best. All right. So your position should be clear in your thesis. So right. So in your thesis, you should summarize the issue, and then your position, and then how you're going to um, sort of defend that position, right? So the thesis really is just a summary of your argument, right? And we'll pick on a couple of examples later, or maybe now. Right. So here is the sample essay or the sample thesis from Statsky's essay, right? So here, when overzealous parents and coaches impose adult standards on children's sports, the result can be activities that are neither satisfying nor beneficial for two children, right? So that is um, her thesis, right? And if you have read her essay, she locates the thesis in the last sentence of the first paragraph, right? So feel free to imitate that. Um, so let's look at her thesis here. When overzealous parents and coaches impose adult standards on children's sports, the result can be activities that are neither satisfying nor beneficial to children, right? So keywords here, right? So children's sports. She's talking about children's sports, right? And what is she talking about? Children's sports. How is she arguing uh, about this issue? So that's her issue, right? The children's sports. Um, and so her issue is that when overzealous parents and coaches impose adult standards on children's sports, the result, right, can be activities that are neither satisfying nor beneficial to children, right? So she is arguing, right, that sending children's or sending, right, like children to kind of this intense sports activities or intense kind of sports programs, right? Um, the result, right, can uh, is not beneficial to the children, right? So there are sort of bad effects to children when they are put in this sort of like rigorous kind of athletic program as very sort of like young kids, right? So she is arguing against, right, putting children into sort of intense competitive sports programs or activities or whatever, right? So that's her kind of like surface argument, right? But also notice, and if you're following my notes here, um, I, I sort of emphasize the word zealous, overzealous, and can be, right? And so she's not saying that all kids and all parents and all sporting activities are problematic, right? But she is actually being very specific here to only talk about overzealous parents and coaches, right? So those parents who are very sort of like overbearing and they push their kids to the brink, right? Almost to an abusive um, kind of way, right? And so she's only talking about sort of abusive parents here, overzealous parents, right? Um, so not talking, so making sure, right, that she's making a distinction between the kinds of parents that she's talking about and the kinds of parents that she's not talking about. She's not talking about responsible, kind of like thoughtful, caring parents, right? She's talking about kind of irresponsible, overzealous parents, right? That sort of force their children into intense sporting activities, right? The result can be, right, activities that are neither. So by saying can be, what she's doing is qualifying, right? So qualifying, just sort of adding, right, adding kind of a qualifier is what it's called, right? A qualifier that sort of makes clear that so it's just a way of sort of clarifying, right? That you're talking about sort of specific, right? You're qualifying what you're saying, right? To make to make sure that you're talking about specific kinds of events, right? So by using can be here, right? Um, she's saying that the result is not always negative, right? But it can be negative, right? She's opening the possibility that there are also children who are put into sporting activities who come out fine, who actually do well, right? So she's not talking about everyone being right. She's just talking about how these specific situations can result, right, um, to something, right? Not always result, but can result, right? So that's what it means, right? To sort of qualify, and that's very important because you don't want to argue for sort of like a broad brushstroke of everyone, right? That what all these people are doing is going to happen like this. You don't want kind of like an absolute position, right? Because then you'll have to defend so much, and there's not enough. Um, this paper is too short, right, to defend everything, every aspect of your issue, right? And so you want to be as specific as possible, right? So a credible position is also one that is backed with facts and statistics. Often writers include statistics in their introduction to set up the credibility of their position. But I also want you to use facts and statistics, right, throughout your essay, right? So these facts and statistics, that's why you have to do research, right, so that you find facts and find statistics, right, to kind of act as your evidence, right? I want to see this, right, throughout your paper. And this is going to be, I am going to be very picky, right? I want to see you using quotations from your research, right? I want you to see, I want to see in-text quotations, right, or in-text citations, right? So quotes, summaries, or referring to, someone's research, right? And that's just as easy as, saying, you lay out your argument, and then you'll say, according to a research conducted by the UCR Sociology Department, and then you'll quote someone, right? Blah, 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 right? So, and that's why I want you to read the sample essays, because that's how, I want you to see how they're incorporating quotations, right? I am very strict about quotations, right? If you're not using quotations, quotes from your research in integrating that into your essay, right? That will put you close to failure, right? In my class. So I want to see, outside sources, quotations being used, right? Evidence, right? Because that's the point of this paper, is for you to not only prove that your position is strong, but also provide evidence, right? Because that ruins it. If you're not using outside sources, if you're not using quotes, right, evidence, that just kind of that discredits your argument, right? So I want to see that throughout, especially the body paragraphs, right? I want to see quotes. So yeah, so an example here, right? 24% worked 5 to 7 days a week. There is just no way such amounts of work will not interfere with schoolwork, especially homework. And in an informal survey, 58% of blah, 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 right? So here, Itzioni is the writer, right? He's not using quotations, right? He is summarizing the statistics, right? But he is still, you still have to cite, even if you're not, if you're only summarizing, right? If you're taking information from other people, right, you always have to cite them, right? Even if you're not using them, or even if you're not using their own words, right, or quoting them. All right, so yeah, so make sure you're quoting. Where are we at? Third basic structure here, or basic feature, an effective response to opposing views. Right, so as I mentioned before, your argument should not be absolute, right? And your argument should not try to answer everything, right? Because you can't. It's too short. You know, even if you have 500 pages, you still can't talk about everything, right? So, so any argument, there's always a gap. There's always room for error. There's always something that other people can argue against, right? And so you have to know all of these things. You have to know all the arguments against your own argument, right? And you have to address them. And so the way that you address them is through refutation or concession, right? So to refute something, right, is to acknowledge the counter argument, right, and then say that yes, this is what other people are saying, but in fact, um, this is what is happening, right? That counter argument is actually not a strong one because A, B, and C, right? So you're sort of disproving or discrediting, right, a counter argument, right? So that's what it means to kind of refute something, right? To kind of to discredit them, right? Or at least to make it seem like your argument is actually stronger than theirs, right? Concession, on the other hand, is um, you hear President Trump has not conceded, right? And he never does, and he never will, right? So I'm recording this um, a couple of hours after the inauguration, right? And it doesn't look like the president, the former president now, has conceded, right? Which is, obviously to admit to defeat, right? So concession, right, from in terms of your paper is just to admit, right, if there are counter arguments, right, that you don't want to address, that your paper is not because you can't, like I said, right, you can't address everything, you can't answer all questions, right? Um, if there are sort of counter arguments, right, that you can't sort of address or that you think are also right, right, because there are multiple arguments around an issue, right? All you have to do is acknowledge that yes, this argument is actually true, right? Um, and acknowledge that. But then you're saying that your argument is actually addressing a different kind of argument and not this argument, even which is why this argument is true and that's okay. And my argument is true and that's good, and then this argument is weak, right? So that's how you would concede, right? By admitting that other arguments are also true, right? Um, so an example, right, of a refutation here. That's right. So the deeper problem with the nothing to hide argument is that it myopically views privacy as a form of secrecy. In contrast, understanding privacy as a plurality of related issues demonstrates that the disclosure of bad things is just one among many difficulties caused by government security measures. Right. So privacy, right, is the issue here, right? And this author is arguing that um, this breach of privacy, right, this governmental federal kind of breach of individual privacy, right, is actually um, being used, right, against individuals, right, and so he is sort of um, he's sort of acknowledging, right, that privacy has kind of like, look at this, privacy as a plurality, right? So the idea of privacy has many aspects, right? And but then he's only addressing one aspect of it, right? So he's sort of um, he's acknowledging, right, that the kind of privacy that he is that he's critiquing, right, is or that he's arguing for, right, is only one kind of privacy, and there are other forms of privacy, right, privacies. And here is a simple one, a concession from Statsky's essay. I acknowledge that some children may benefit from playing competitive sports, right? So that's kind of like a simple concession, right? So some children will benefit from competitive sports, right? But these specific children, by specific parents, right, in a specific context, right, actually do not benefit, right? So that's your argument. All right, and then lastly, a clear and logical organization, right? So this refers to the structure, right, of your paragraphs, the structure of your sentences, right? And the idea is to sort of guide your reader not only to keep them right from or to keep them engaged and reading, right, um, but also to guide them in understanding the complexities of your essay, right? Because if your structure is kind of everywhere, then you're confusing your readers, and you're not going to be able to convey, right, your arguments properly. So in terms of structure, right, I urge you to just follow, right, the sample essays, follow the 5 paragraph essays, right, and right, and so that just means sort of, you should kind of know this by now, but a body paragraph, right, would the first sentence of the body paragraph would be introducing your argument and then giving examples using your evidence throughout the paragraph, right? And then the last sentence of that paragraph should be a summary of what you've discussed in throughout the paragraph, right? So there should be a structure. Every paragraph, right, especially the body paragraphs, should have a structure, right, so that we kind of know what your argument is, how you're proving this argument. So okay, so think about each paragraph as a mini argument, right? Where the first sentence is kind of a thesis, and then you have your evidence, and then a summary, right? So that's one way to kind of structure um, your paragraph, right? Um, and it's just making sure that you're reading the examples, right, the sample essays. That's how you kind of familiarize yourself with that. But also on the sentence level, right, just using words, right, conjunctions, right, like look at this. Highly organized competitive sports are too often played to adult standards, which are developmentally inappropriate for children and can be both physically and psychologically harmful. Furthermore, they are actually counterproductive for developing either future players or fans. Finally, they provide occasions for some parents and coaches to place their own fantasies and needs ahead of their children. Right. So on the one hand, this passage kind of guides us, right? So by using furthermore, finally, moreover, right? Different kinds of conjunctions have different purpose, right? But it's kind of enumerating for us, right? Her defense, her sort of argument, right? So this is what competitive sports does to the children psychologically and physically, and then this is another layer, and then this is another layer, right? So that's just an example of a well organized um, argument, right? Um, yeah, but like I said, these are all kind of things that you can learn, but it's really about reading the examples, right? The sample essays that make this clear. So I will go through the Statsky essay now and kind of talk about what she's doing and how you can kind of imitate, right, her structure. All right, so this is the Jessica Statsky essay, right, called Children Need to Play, Not Compete. Right, so it's pretty clear what her argument is about just by her title, right? And that's another thing, right? I want you to come up with an original title, right? Something that like use keywords too, right? Something that will kind of give us a hint on what your arguments are about. Right? So pay attention to the titles of these sample essays, right? And try to kind of see what it's doing and come up with your own, right? Yeah, so I want to see a good, a good title, a creative title um, in your paper. All right, so let's read the first paragraph. Organized sports for young people have become an institution in North America, reports sports journalist Steve Silverman, attracting more than 44 million youngsters according to a survey by the National Council of Youth Sports. Though many adults regard Little League baseball and Pee Wee football as a basic part of childhood, the games are not always joyful. The games are not always joyous ones. Right? When overzealous parents and coaches impose adult standards on children's sports, the result can be activities that are neither satisfying nor beneficial to children. Right? So, so notice what she's doing here, right? So she's using statistics immediately in her introduction, right? So that's one way to um, to open your argument, right? By using statistics. Another way of doing that could be, providing an anecdote, right? A story that you can then link, right, to. So in this case, if for example, Jessica Statsky had an experience with a child, right? Knew a child or had her own child who went through this, right? Or not her own child, but like knew people, right? Whose parents, right, put their child. So she could also tell a story of those people that she knew, right? So that would be another way, right, of introducing her argument here. But she's using statistics here instead, right? So these are the kind of this is what's going on. This is how, and the statistics also adds to the intensity, the urgency of her argument, right? So many children, right, being put into competitive sports, 44 million, right? That's kind of like a staggering number, right? And so if there's a problem that sort of that involves 44 million American children or North American children, right? That's a pretty big problem, right? And so she's giving an intensity, right? She's giving an urgency to um, to her argument by using statistics. And I will skip um, paragraph 2. That's kind of just an explanation. I'll go to paragraph 3. So paragraph 3 here, right? So usually in a 5 paragraph essay structure, right? Introduction, 3 body paragraphs, conclusion. The third paragraph of the body paragraphs, right? So the last paragraph of the body is usually when you put your concession. So you've done all your argument in the first 2 paragraphs, and then in the third paragraph, that's when you'll talk about the counter arguments, and then that's where you refute or you concede, right, the counter arguments, right. But notice what she's doing here. She's actually talking about, or um, she's putting her concession and refutation in in the opening paragraph of the body paragraphs, right? So that's a it's not wrong, obviously. It's just a stylistic thing, right? And I'm okay either way. But I want to see uh, counter argument or concession and refutation, right? So if you want to put it in the introduction or in the first paragraph or the third paragraph, it doesn't matter to me as long as there is one, right? Right. So her here, what she's actually doing is she has concession and refutation on the first paragraph and then on the last paragraph. So she's kind of framing her argument with these two counter arguments, right? So paragraph 3. Yet many parents would disagree with my view that children should not be encouraged to participate in organized sports. Parents are correct, right, to be frustrated by their children's lack of physical activity. We are living in a culture where too many children spend their time in front of television, computer screen, playing video games, and social media. Right. So she's acknowledging immediately that it's good, like you know, allowing children to play sports, putting them in sports program. There are good things about that, right? Because we are living in a culture where children are oftentimes not being very active, right? So she's kind of stating, yes, this is the good thing about sports, right? Which is a good way to set it up, because then she kind of she she tells us of the good things, right? And then she'll eventually kind of follow that immediately with here's what's wrong with it now, right? So she's doing a kind of balance here, right? And here's another refutation, right? There's no doubt that organized sports get children on their feet and out of the house. However, the risks of participating in competitive sports at a young age may well outweigh the health benefits, right? So at the last sentence, right? So she's making the counter argument for why sports is good, but then on the last sentence, right? She summarized that, and then she's saying, but here's what's wrong with it, right? So that's a good way to end the paragraph, right? Is by sort of giving us a summary of what's been said, right? But then also introducing us to the next argument, to the next paragraph, right? And then paragraphs 4 and 5 here, right? That's when she starts talking about what's wrong, right? And notice too how she structured this. Paragraphs 4 and 5, she's talking about the physical, the kind of the physical dangers, right, of excessive sports training to kids, right? And yeah, so she's citing the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine, right? So look at here, right? There is a growing epidemic, quote, there's a growing epidemic of preventable youth sports injuries, unquote, according to the American Orthopedic Society for Sports Medicine, right? And then she quotes some more, right? So she's giving us a lot of quotes here. This is what I want to see, right? A lot of quotations from your research. All right, and another thing when you're quoting, right? And you should know this by now. This is something that should have been sort of taught in 1A, right? But I know some of you did not go through 1A. But when you're quoting, when you're using other people's words, right? Do not what is called floating quotation, right? Where an entire sentence is just quotation, right? You want to avoid that, right? Notice here, you don't really see any quotation that occupies an entire sentence, right? The quotations are always either introduced, right, by saying, according to American Orthopedic Sports Society, and then quote, right? So that's the introduction is the according to, right? Instead of just putting the quote there. That's called a floating quotation, which you don't want, right? Or you can sort of pick phrases, right? Phrases from your quotes, right? Smaller quotes, shorter quotes from your research, and then kind of weave that, right, throughout your own sentences, right? So there's various ways of incorporating quotation into your own sentences, but you should always incorporate quotations into your own sentences, right? So yeah, so just like notice here how, and then for example, right, this is still on paragraph 4, kind of in the middle of the paragraph. Nevertheless, Leonard Kopet, I guess, in Sports Illusion, Sports Reality, claims that a 12-year-old trying to throw a curveball, for example, may put abnormal strain on developing arm and shoulder muscles, sometimes resulting in lifelong injuries, right? So, and then you see the in-text quotation here, page 294, right? So she's not quoting here, she's actually just summarizing or paraphrasing, right, from this Kopet person, right? But she's still giving him credit, right? Because that's where she gets the information from, right? So that's another way, right, of integrating your research without actually quoting, right? And that's something that you can do, but I want to see more quotation, more than summary or paraphrase, right? You can have one or two summaries here and there, but I want to see more quotation than summaries. Notice here too, where she uses on paragraph 3 and paragraph 4, she uses block quotations, right? Which means that she uses, some of you might know, right? A block quotation is are quotations that are more than 4 lines. If you have more than 4 lines, then you kind of block it, right? So that means that you indent the whole thing from your paragraph, right? She's using that here, but I don't want you to use that in your paper. Your paper is very short. It's 3 to 5 pages. And so block quotations, it just takes away from your argument, right? Block quotations are usually just used for longer essays, right? So avoid using block quotations, which means just limit your quotations to less than 4 lines, right? So then you won't need to block it, right? Or if you have a quotation that's very important and you feel like you need to include it, just cut it into 2, right? And then introduce it here and then add another one here, right? Or something like that. But yeah, avoid block quotations. All right, so paragraphs 4 and 5, right, outlines kind of the physical harm that that children, right, who go into intense athletic training might experience, right? And then Paragraphs 6 and 7, right, tackles kind of like the psychological effect, right? So I think that's a good way to structure the argument, right? So here are the physical harms, right? And then here are the psychological harms, right? That right. So page 6 here, or paragraph 6, even when children are not injured, right? So even if they're not physically injured, uh, Tutko points out, sorry, Tutko points out, fear, fear of being hurt detracts from their enjoyment of the sport, right? So even if they're not hurt physically, right, there is actually they sort of they start fearing the possibility of being hurt, right? And then that sort of takes away from the fun, from the joy of of the sports, right? So a lot of times, parents are will say, the children are enjoying themselves in the sports activities, right? But in fact, many children are, they sports can be very intense and then can be very physical, right? So there is a level of fear, right, that some children um, kind of go through that can be traumatic, right? I remember when I was when I was very young and I was not very athletic at all. Um, I just kind of like to read and sit down and not do anything, which turned out fine because now I'm a PhD student and that's useful. Um, but yeah, but my parents were kind of wanted me to be active and uh, uh, be out and about and doing things, and so my parents kind of put me into, I don't know, kind of like a baseball camp or whatever, and I was so scared of baseball because it's very it's hard. And I always just kind of like imagine getting hit in the face by it, and so that just kind of like even now like I try not to do any sports. I play tennis because the ball is very unthreatening, but that's about all the sports that I play. Um, but yeah, so that's still like something that kind of I think about, right? When I think about football or baseball, right? Is kind of this fear of getting hit by that ball. But anyway, yeah, and so she's arguing here, right, that that fear is real and it traumatizes a lot of children, right, and it takes away from the fun of sports, right. And then she argues, different layers of how the psychological trauma happens, right, and again using quotes, using evidence, right. Um, yeah, so make sure you read these sample essays because that's really the only way you can kind of, I mean, I can talk and talk and talk, right, and tell you how to do it, but you sort of like reading the samples, kind of understanding what's going on there, right, that's really and writing it yourself, right, writing and then editing and then proofreading, right, it's writing is a process, right, and if you can do that yourself. You can ask help from ARC, right, from the Academic Resource Center. Have a friend or family member, partner, um, kind of read your paper, right. Sometimes it's good to just have someone else, right, to read it if they understand it or not, right. And obviously, you know, just I'm here, right, for you. And so just email me, meet up with me, or give me a copy of your draft and tell me, I'm worried about my thesis. Can you tell me if this is okay or not? Right? It's as simple as that. Um, yeah, that's really like just it's a process. And then you have to kind of edit your paper, and then so it's a process to produce a good argument, right? So researching, writing, and then proofreading and editing. Right. That's how it works. Right, and then paragraph 9, we get another concession, right? And so, like I said, she is kind of playing around. But for this is a long paper, right? This is longer than what you need to do. And so you'll be okay with just one paragraph of concession or refutation, right? She has like 3 here, so that's not necessary for you. And then conclusion, right? Conclusion is just a summary of your arguments and a kind of explanation of why is it important for me to read your paper. What's at stake, right? Why should I care? So something like that. It's just basic, give me something kind of like a grand idea of, if my argument is right, this is what's at stake, right? More children will be saved, right? Whatever. Right, and then also look at the works cited page. Obviously here she has so many sources, you're only required 3, but pay attention to the structure here, right? So works cited page should be its own page, a separate page. It has to say works cited on top, right? And then it should be in MLA format, right? There's a formatting chapter in the book. There's also links on our syllabus of where you can find, if you're not familiar with MLA format. Or you can ask me on Friday or on a meeting if you want, or whatever, right? So yeah. So I think that's that for now. I will now talk about, just briefly, about the prompt, right? Where's the prompt? Okay. So I've included the prompt in this email. As described by the SMG, this essay is a more thoughtful, deliberative kind of argument, one that depends on critical analysis of an issue and involves logical reasoning rather than raised voices, which is more likely to convince others of the validity of your position. Right? Reasoned argument is also more likely to be expected in college courses and in the workplace. This means that a good portion of your argument should be based on factual research and examples. So I've talked about that already. Not mere personal opinions. For this essay, you can choose either a topic or theme from the short story, right? From A Good Man is Hard to Find, from which you will take a position, right? Or you can choose a completely different topic, any topic that you want, right? But obviously you're going to pass that by me, right? You're gonna email me at the end of this week so that I can tell you if the topic is good or not, right? Yeah, so find a topic that interests you. Then find articles about what the views are about that specific topic. You will then pick a side, right? Then defend that side. Again, right, the required basic features with which I just talked about, right? I want to see a focused and well presented issue, a well supported position, right? Opposing views, clear logical organization. Right? So these are the things that I'll be looking for. Yeah, and then in addition to the above, there has to be a thesis statement, right, which is in the last sentence or the last 2 sentences of the introduction. And then your paper must cite evidence from at least 3 reliable sources, right? At least 1 scholarly article. So the scholarly article, just use Google Scholar, right, or UCR library website, right? So anything that you will find in Google Scholar and UCR Library, those are automatically scholarly articles, right? So, so you only need one scholarly article, and then the rest, the two others, right, can be from an encyclopedia, magazine, newspapers, right? And if you're not sure, right, so it has to be reliable, right? And so if you're not sure if your source is reliable or not, just let me know. Just ask me, and I will tell you. Include a full works cited page, right, which is a separate page. Your paper must follow MLA citation style and be a minimum of 1,200 words, 3 to 5 pages in Times New Roman 12-point font with 1-inch margins all around. Right, and then this is important. You must save your essay document like so. Right, so when you save your paper, and before submitting it to me, make sure that you put your last name and then essay1, right, and then save it and then submit it, right. That makes it easier for me to kind of when I download your paper in my computer, it's easier for me to organize the papers, right. And as much as you can, please use Word document. It makes everything easier for me and faster for me to grade your paper so that you can get it back, right, immediately, right. If you really can't, I mean, we have free access to Word Office, right, through UCR. If you need help figuring that out, please let me know. But we have free Word access through UCR. But if for some reason you just can't access Word, or you just refuse to with all your might, I'm not going to force you, but as much as you can, right, try to use a Word document. Yeah, if you really can't, just do a PDF, and I won't deduct points or whatever, right? But it's just a preference for me. And then again, it's due through Safe Assign on iLearn on Wednesday, February 3 at midnight, right? So if you have questions about the prompt, about the lecture, about the readings, right, just save those for Friday's Zoom meeting. Right? And I think that's it for now. Bye.